Welcome everybody to my third of these talks. This time we're featuring Dayna Pidhoresky, which is awesome. Very excited. And Dayna is a 2:29 marathoner. She is your Toronto Waterfront Marathon champion, so your Canadian marathon champion, and is headed to the Olympics, hopefully, because right now, who really knows? But I'm sure they will happen in 2021. So I guess, Dayna, the first question, how's it going? What's going on in your running right now?
It's going okay. In February, I developed a little tendon issue in my soleus. So I've been rehabbing that and getting back to running, trying to not do too much because this is the perfect time to make sure that everything's fully healed. And yeah, riding a lot on my bike inside on Zwift. Sort of is the only thing I've been doing besides running. I try to get outside walking, but other than that, I really have kept my running on the treadmill as well because just to limit the changes of terrain as that sort of tendon is healing. So, yes, very much inside doing a lot of training.
Sounds, well, I guess Zwift is okay, but to me, treadmills are pretty monotonous.
Yeah,
So,
it's pretty brutal.
yeah, I can imagine. So, we'll start with a few rapid fire questions, and then we'll get into some very deep thought questions. So, my first my first one is, what's your most memorable race?
Yeah, that was easy. Toronto, for sure.
Fair enough. I
Yeah, this past year.
Great. Fair enough. I do remember watching that race. It was certainly impressive. So, what's the race you'd most like to forget?
This one, I think I had already forgotten about it because I wrote down something like something came to my mind different at first, and then I'm like, oh no, no, that's not it. It's London 2017. It was it was just the worst race. It was so embarrassing. I was undertrained. I was not recovered from qualifying in Ottawa, and I have, besides trying to remember all of the things that I could learn from that race, I've already forgotten it.
Fair enough. I do remember reading your blog post about that, and it seemed like you were trying to forget it right away.
Yeah.
Uh, favorite workout?
10 by a K on the road. On the road being the key. That's a key variable.
Fair enough. I do like K repeats as well. Favorite workout or least
Yeah.
favorite workout?
Anything on the track, specifically like 200s or 400s or 800s, really just anything on the track
So we're not going
is
to
the
see you
worst.
at the Pacific Distance Carnival anytime soon.
I will never be there
Great.
unless I'm spectating.
Okay. Favorite shoe?
I run in pretty much everything. Um, any like neutral cushioned shoe. So right now I have the Saucony Triumph. I have the New Balance 1080, which I've worn for forever. I have the Asics Nimbus, Nike Vomero. Basically any super cushioned trainer is my go-to.
So you were the
No
master shoe.
preference.
You were the master shoe rotator, is what you're telling me. Okay. And
Oh yeah.
then last of the rapid fires, if you could do another Olympic sport, what would it be?
Um, cross country skiing, but I've been told it won't translate as easily as I think.
Huh. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so let's move on to some deeper questions that took more thought on my end anyway. So your Toronto victory last year was obviously a pretty big moment in your career. You PB'd. You ran 2:29. You got the Olympic standard. You secured yourself a spot for Tokyo with the win. Um, and then you solidified yourself as one of the top Canadian marathoners, at least current generation. So can you walk us through this race? what was your plan heading into it? Did you execute like you wanted to? And then I guess like what has that done for you since? So like what's it done for your career since?
Um, I guess going into it, it was I had like a quiet confidence going into the race. It's funny because Josh, my husband, my coach, he was extremely confident. He kept telling me that he had a good feeling about it the whole week leading into the race, and I was just like, okay, you're just saying that. But I, I think I had that feeling as well. Um, the last like 4 or 5 weeks of my training had gone really well, which I guess it's better than it not going well at all. But I had a pretty rocky build prior to that. I had some low iron issues that probably started like the previous August, and just I didn't figure that out until like a year later. So once we remedied that, training really came back on track. Um, but I guess like my meaty workouts, which are the ones that usually give me the most confidence, had gone really well. So going into the race, I was in a good spot. Everything had gone well in like the recent past. And even though my confidence in my build waned quite a bit, our goal was to always go for the win because that's the best way to secure your spot, and hoping that if you won, um, you'd run fast, because I think that's what it would take to win against those women. Um, Although, since, yeah, for Toronto, I guess because it's gold label, top five would also give you Olympic standard. So technically, you could run the time standard or you could be top five, and it's the same thing, I guess, if you win. But um, that was always our goal. And it was sort of, to me, I found it a bit funny. I was not mentioned as like a favorite going into the race. And I just sort of chuckled to myself. I think like I'm quite happy to not have to be doing pressers and stuff. It's just more mental energy for me to focus on the race, and it sort of fueled like my want to really win that. And so getting to the start line, um, it was a perfect day in Toronto. Like it's often not that calm, so everything was sort of, I could see everything coming together. I did some strides right before the race started, and I told Josh that my legs felt tired, and he was just like, "Yeah, you're fine. You're fine." As soon as the gun went off, I felt really claustrophobic, and I think that's what sort of hastened my. I mean, I didn't start super fast, but if you've run that course before, it's quite downhill for the first 5K. So it's not abnormal to start like a little bit faster than your pace goal. So that was fine at 5K. Um, then we got to 10K, and I knew that the other Canadians were quite a ways behind. I could just feel that. And I was with one of the two pacers that Alan had selected to sort of lead the Olympic standard group. When I realized I was quite a ways ahead of what I would originally try to be at, um, it was sort of at that point where, I mean, there's nothing that you can do. If you're ahead of time, you're not going to slow down and just, um, like, you just have to press on. That's the only thing. And I was with my pacer, and we had somebody, another guy who was running the half. So that was a great chance for me to sort of tuck in behind them. And interestingly enough, it was the same pacer who had paced me previously in Ottawa, or one of the two. So I knew him and I knew I could rely on him because he ran with me the whole marathon in Ottawa. So it's funny because I think people think that I really like took it out hard. And that's the opposite of what I felt like I was doing. I was very much focused the whole time on finishing hard after 33K. So everything before that was in preparation to be able to turn on the jets once you got to that, I guess, the furthest end of the course, and then you were running back into the city. Um, at 15K, I was thinking it's almost halfway before I can start racing this. And I think that helped me um, continually like think about conserving, even though by the time I got there, I did not feel like I was going to be turning on the jets. But yeah, everything felt very relaxed. I started to feel fatigued around 28K. So that's sort of as you're heading towards the beaches, and it's a little bit, I think it was a little rolly. I remember feeling the wind, and it's hard because at that point it was just Jean-Marie, my pacer, and he's so small, and I'm not really able to tuck in behind him. But I kept thinking, okay, just get to the end, and then you turn around. And at the end, turning around, I could see Emily Setlak. She was the next Canadian. She looked really strong. But I think I had about a minute 40 up on her. And I mean, I wasn't feeling great, but I think I knew that if I didn't fully fall apart, that would be enough. Um, it's interesting because this wasn't a race where we wanted to see how fast I could run. It was very much about uh, running smart. And that was keeping those two goals in mind of running under the Olympic standard and being first Canadian. So I think I'm excited for the future of being able to like really push it to the end, but this wasn't the race to do that. So I just sort of kept it, I guess, more cautious. Um, I kept getting like these mental flashbacks of watching like those Ironman finishes where they're crawling to the finish line. And I was like, this cannot be you. You have to run to the end because Emily is coming. So just make sure that you run smart and just like keep it together. So yeah, I didn't know that I had it until I turned that last corner and saw the clock and saw the finish line. And yeah, it was just super surreal that I finally put it all together on the day, and the day that really mattered most in my career thus far. Prior to that, I feel like every marathon I've run has been pretty disappointing in terms of what I think I'm capable of and what I do on the day. So yeah, it was amazing to finish and have Alan there and Josh at the finish line, and my parents were there as well watching. So I'll never forget that day.
Great, thanks. And it's great to, I like how you dissected the race for us, which is great. I always like to kind of hear those race insights. So on the prediction thing, I'm going to take credit for this. And Josh reads my stuff, so he can second this. Is I actually had you first overall, but just saying.
Yeah.
You can go
I
back, read it. It's
appreciate
still
that.
up. It's still up. Yeah. So just a couple follow-up questions. So you talked again, as I said, about in race and the tactics. So what happened in that first 10K? Because the cameras didn't even know you were, I don't know if you've rewatched the race, but the cameras didn't
I
even
did.
know you were up there. They were with Middleton and Setlak, and there were a couple other people in that group, an American. Anyway, they didn't even
Yeah,
know you were up there. So what happened?
I don't know. I'm not sure who's manning those cameras, but um, I think I'm a very efficient downhill runner, and starting a marathon like that, it's really just all about feeling it out and feeling what you can do. So especially being in the city in those early kilometers, I just sort of went with what felt like marathon effort, and it was obviously a lot faster. I don't really know how they lost me. Maybe I wasn't one of the ones who was being tracked at all initially. That's fine. I'm sure those girls, they knew exactly, I'm sure they knew I was ahead of them for sure. Um, and the cyclists were with me. So I don't really know what happened, but
So it was just the camera people then.
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it was just the camera people. The lead cyclist was with me the whole time.
Because it was about 15K, where at least when I was watching, I was like, whoa,
Yeah,
everything,
I know.
everything's changed.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
that's funny.
yeah. So can you tell us about the text from Trevor Hoffbauer after the race?
Mm. The one about,
Like, let's book our plane tickets,
oh
or
yeah, so that was, when did we text that to each other? July. Josh says it was in July. Um, it I've known Trevor for a really long time. I worked for New Balance a while ago, and he was a rep at the time, and I did some display stuff for them in Windows. And it was when he was sort of just having, I think this dream just started, and I remember thinking, oh wow, Trevor, you've got a long way to go. And and then he did it. He went that way. So I think we must have been chatting back and forth about both doing Toronto, and just, I don't know, funnily enough, just said something out of the blue like, oh, let's book our tickets to Tokyo in the fall or something. And after the race, I remember that conversation and tried to like dig it up, and it's just crazy to think how two people who were just so under the radar performed that way on the same day. Uh, yeah, it's wonderful. He definitely like won the day though. Like I hope we can all agree on that, because his time
oh, he
is
crushed it.
just spectacular.
He
Yeah.
crushed it. 209. It
Yeah.
came out of nowhere. Now I said I
What the
predicted.
heck?
I said I predicted you, but I did not predict that.
No, I don't think he would. He wasn't even wearing a watch. He's a madman. It was just, um, like I wanted to rewatch the race just to watch his race, really, not to watch me at all. But the whole time he just looked so good. It
Mhm.
was,
And he's such a big guy too. Anyway,
I know, he's like a gazelle.
so last question on Toronto before, or I guess Toronto related things before we move on to Ottawa. So obviously Tokyo has been moved to 2021, and knock on wood, it happens. How is that kind of, and you said you've injured now, so it's kind of actually probably a good thing for you.
Yeah.
But how has that changed your like race planning moving forward?
Um, it doesn't really change that much, except for the fact that if there are races in the fall, I'd maybe look to run a fall marathon, because I think it's a large gap, um, if I didn't have the opportunity to do that. So that really is the only change. I mean, I like racing. We don't have that. Like you said, it is a gift to sort of be in the state that I'm in right now, where I'm just building back to running and not having any races in the near future, is keeping me patient, which is sometimes hard when you have races coming up. So that served me really well right now. It's a sucky situation, but I'm sort of treating it like a gift in that sense. I guess the other thing would be is, and I forgot to touch on this as part of your question previously about Toronto, but it changed my career entirely. I was having such a struggle throughout the summer that in my mind I was like, I don't know if I can continue training like this without getting the results that I want. And I was joking or half joking to Josh that I was going to like start swimming in the winter and like transition to triathlon, which he just thought was the most hilarious thing. But I was sort of serious about that because I just needed a change of space. So in relation to your other question, my Toronto really brought a lot to me. I was able to secure a sponsorship, and that sort of changes how I view racing now, because it's not about wanting to like chase prize purses and money. I still like to race, of course, but I don't need to look for money in racing. It can be if it fits into my schedule, just because I'm now supported and I have that financial support through my sponsor. So that's been a huge change. And it's like a blessing that happened for me this year in a year where there's no races to be had.
Who sponsored you?
Lululemon.
Great. So buy their
Love
stuff.
them.
Okay. So let's kind of transition to Ottawa. You've run there twice. There's a few people on this call from Ottawa. I live in Ottawa. So you've won the women's race, the Canadian women's race anywhere there twice. And last time you finished 6th. So why the Ottawa Marathon, right? Because not a lot of Canadians run that one. So what?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why Ottawa?
It's a good time of year. Yeah. Josh is yelling at me saying it wasn't the first choice. It is a good time of year in that you have more time to prepare for it, because it is at the end of May. I think previously I did it when I was trying to qualify for Worlds. Because of that, I had been injured that winter. So Ottawa gave me the most time to prepare, which was great. This year we chose it, or last year we chose it because if you're looking at the gold label races and you're aiming for that top 5, Ottawa is the easiest to try to do that. And that's sort of what we were hoping for. We were hoping that I could get that Olympic standard, because time-wise, that'd be difficult there. The courses, it's pretty hilly, mm-hmm. and it's often hot, but we were hoping to get that Olympic standard via placing in Ottawa. And
you almost did.
I came up a little short. Yeah.
And so I want to ask you about that. Mm-hmm. The person who ultimately finished 3rd or 4th actually got busted for doping in Toronto later that fall.
Yeah, so, she did.
And I don't want to dwell on this because dopers shouldn't talk about it all, but like, how does that make you feel, right? Like, you could have already had instead of going for time in Toronto, you could have simply been racing for the win. So yeah, just your thoughts on that. Just quick on the doping thing.
That's such an interesting thing to think of when I look back, because I don't know how that would have changed my mentality, and it really could have been for the worse. I could have maybe not been trying as hard, or thought that I was in a safe position. So I'm sort of glad that I was 6 and didn't have that spot, because I don't know how it would have changed how I raced in Toronto, and I wouldn't have wanted to race any differently there.
Okay. So my last question, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So if you're on, you can either throw the question in the chat or you can raise your hand, and we'll get to your question. But for me, the last one is, and we've addressed this just quickly. You race a lot, as you've said, and like I think I was counting your races last year before Toronto, and you were up to like 9 or something. You did Around the Bay, Sun Run, St. Patrick's Day, all the local races, and the Canadian races, which are great, and Indianapolis, which I know you've done a lot. So is it your plan to race a lot? I know you said you like racing a lot. And then I guess the big question is, does it help or hinder a marathon if you race a lot? At least
we always map out the year and see what fits and what doesn't. And sometimes we keep races as options that are local, knowing that we can add it in or take it away depending on how I'm feeling. For me, racing helps prevent me from getting to the start line feeling rusty. I think it calms my nerves to already have a lot of races in my system, because I can tend to be a little bit on the nervous and anxious side before races. So, those first few races of the season, I'm usually like a disaster as far as nerves go, like not being able to sleep. But I think I just sort of get over that the more I'm racing. I think it's also important to note that I'm not treating every race equally. So some are checkpoints, most of them are checkpoints. And I guess that comes with the reality that you have to be okay with them not all going well, because that very much happens when you race in the midst of heavy training without a taper. And that's something that I'm okay with. So I always want a PB, but I know that most of those checkpoint races aren't set up for me to get one. And they might not be set up for me to feel great or super confident afterwards. But once we get back to training, I end up being better, because I feel like I'm getting a harder effort than I would in training. And like I said earlier, it's a good way to make money. There's always a financial component to racing and choosing what we race. And I think it's also like, I want to support the CRS. I do a lot of their races, and I always try to put myself in a position to get some series money, because it's like free money,
Did you win the series last year?
I didn't. I was maybe 1 or 2 points behind Rachel Hanna.
Oh, so cool.
It's hard because some races are like double points, some are single, and I was like 5th place at Eastside 10K, so that didn't really help my chances.
It's also an Ontario bias. Not that I'm complaining about that, but
Yeah.
There's lots of races in Ontario. So let's get to questions. I'll start with Dan's question, and then we'll go to Ron on the line. So Dan asks, any interim goals for the fall or winter in terms of a half or even another marathon, which you touched on? And then are you going to go for personal bests in these events?
We'll have to see what the fall winter looks like. I just don't really know when that season is going to start back up again. Josh and I were thinking about marathon, sort of thinking about New York Marathon. New York's in quite a state, so I'm not really sure, but it is in November, so maybe that's a more viable option. The reason we thought about that one was because it's not a super fast course, and I think it mimics the championship racing that I might experience in the Olympics. So I don't know if I would focus on a PB per se, as just learning how to better race the marathon, unfortunately.
No.
I'm excited to go after like a really fast course and run a fast PB, but I don't think that'll be until after the Olympics.
And that's fair. And you've seen people like Jared Ward who've had success in New York who've also had success in the Olympics. So
Yeah.
that's probably a good comparable.
Yeah,
Okay,
true.
okay, Ron.
Okay. Hi, Dana. Just wanted to first of all congratulate you on your Toronto win and qualifying for Tokyo. That's
Thank you.
pretty awesome stuff. I know you put in a lot of hard work to get there. I think I read in your blogs or something, maybe a 100-month process in the marathon to sort of achieve that goal. You did mention probably earlier in the conversation about your failures as well, possibly your embarrassing race in London, and I know you did have some other races that didn't quite go your way. So I'm just wondering how those sort of failures or led to your, I guess, successes and the ultimate success of achieving your Olympic dream.
Thank you for that question. And it's such a great question because I really have a hard time letting go of those failures. I'm that person who at night it's like just going over and over in my mind, and I'm just like constantly thinking about it. And one of those ones was Chicago in 2018. It wasn't really anything in my control. I got sick a couple of days leading into the race, and it sort of peaked the day of the race. But it was one of those races I had such a hard time letting go of. And I was working with a sport psychologist, and she really helped me let go of it by turning it into what I can learn from this race. And it's not about like making like a negative a positive, but about sort of taking everything you can from a bad situation. So for that race, it was, thinking about everything that went wrong or could go wrong and how to react when that's happening during a race. So making a list basically of any scenario, even if it sounds like it would never happen, and putting in your reaction so that when you get to the race and that happens, you already know what to do. And that race just sort of brought about that need to do this. And at the same time, doing that helped me sort of put that race to bed. Like I wasn't thinking about it anymore and distressing about it. There's a reason it happened. So now going into races, I'm trying to like keep my cortisol levels lower so that my immune system stays ready to fight whatever I'm going to be in contact with while traveling. And I even take like some cold FX, sort of like a 2-week protocol going into races, which I did going to Toronto as well, because anytime you travel, anytime you're under that stress, you're sort of putting your body at risk. So if that hadn't happened, maybe I wouldn't have been doing that, and maybe I would have gotten sick before Toronto as well. So it's just bad races happen, but sometimes there's like little things that you can take from those races. And then I think for me, I always learn more from the bad races because they stick with you longer. So there's the rainbow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So Teresa asked a 3-part question here. I'm just going to ask the last part, considering you were talking about the sports psychology side. Do you have a mantra when things get tough in a race? Or a mantra, which I don't know how you pronounce it.
I think I've heard both. I guess it depends on how I'm feeling. Sometimes if I'm starting to feel a little bit tired or fatigued, I've developed this phrase that's just like light, quick, fast. And it helps me just sort of up my cadence a bit. And sometimes doing that can sort of revive your legs, at least for a short while. In Toronto, I kept sort of repeating to myself, and it sounds dumb, but I kept saying, it's your moment. And that was just sort of reminding me to keep the door open for something great to happen and to not be scared or back off and just allow what was happening to happen.
Wasn't that the race slogan?
It might have been. So thank you, Alan.
I was going to say, that sounds familiar, but yeah.
So funny. I think it's your moment, and I just made it my moment.
Maybe you picked it up on the way into the expo. That works.
It was definitely, I think it was like the hashtag of the week. So I was using it, and then during the race, it was used more.
Hey, whatever works.
Exactly.
Okay, Josh put some questions in here.
Uh-oh.
They're not that bad, don't worry. So, favorite race. What's your favorite race? So not like most memorable, favorite.
I liked Detroit half marathon. That was definitely like my breakthrough race in 2010. And it's just pretty cool. You start, the sun's rising, and you're running over Ambassador Bridge, and then you're running around Windsor and coming back through the tunnel. It's a pretty cool race. How many races are going over an international border?
Yeah, not very many. Longest training run?
I think 38K.
Okay.
Probably did that once, maybe twice.
Bucket list race you haven't done yet. And you can't say New York because you've already talked about that.
Bucket list race. It's not really like a road race, like a fast race, but I do want to do Big Sur Marathon one day because it just looks like, I love nature so much. It looks amazing where it is. And
are you going to do the Boston Big Sur double that everyone already
I will never. What does that mean?
So I think Boston and Big Sur are like they're on opposite sides of the country, obviously.
Yes.
And then they're on back-to-back weekends. So you run Boston, and never people go and run Big Sur.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. You don't have to.
I don't know about that. I don't know.
Okay. Then the other parts of Teresa's question were, when did you know you had the talent and drive to become an elite athlete, an elite runner? And is the marathon your favorite distance?
I was never like that person growing up who thought that they would make the Olympics or had any shot at making the Olympics. Wasn't really until 2010, 2011 when I started running longer road races that I thought that would be an option. Prior to that, I just like laughed at people who would like ask me, "Oh, are you going to run in the Olympics?" Because I was good, but I wasn't what I would consider great. Sorry, what was the other question?
Is the marathon your favorite distance?
Oh, right now I think probably, yeah. I think my favorite distance is always like when I'm having most fun racing. So since that was my last race, yes.
Fair enough. Okay, and then just kind of a quick follow-up. You went to University of Windsor, right?
Yeah.
So how does that play into your development? And like, was there a particular coach or a particular like race where you really realized like, oh, this could be something that I do?
Yeah, I was good as a rookie. Then I just was injured constantly, like I think most university athletes are. My last year of competing for Windsor was my best year, but even then it's not like I was winning CIs, or I guess U Sport now. I think I was all Canadian, second team all Canadian maybe. So I never thought it was something I would continue to do. I definitely thought I was going to be going back to school, getting a master's of some sort, and continuing my education. But like I said, once I got to racing on the roads, that changed. I think staying in the Canadian university system was a good choice. I always sort of look back and think, what would have happened if I'd gone to the US and trained? Would I still have wanted to run after university? And I don't know. I also think, like, what if I'd had a lot of success as a university athlete? Maybe I wouldn't have wanted to continue running. Maybe I would have felt fulfilled after that. So sort of funny how, things like that can make a difference. But I think I was still hungry. And I knew that my talent was in the longer distances, because I was definitely more of a cross country runner than a track runner. So, yeah.
That was pretty clear based on your first answer.
That
you
is
didn't
true.
like anything on the track.
True.
I love cross country too. And I think it really
Yeah.
equates to, like, the marathon and the cross country are similar, very similar body.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to say body
As
types.
similar as you can get.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just toughness is really the word, I guess.
Yeah.
So Richard asks, do you have any suggestions on how to maintain fitness and or postpone a build for a fall marathon in this uncertain time? He says he's looking at Boston in September, but doesn't know if it's going to happen or not.
It is challenging, isn't it? I think it's about keeping your training sustainable right now and being really conscious of the mental strain that you're under as well, because the last thing you want is to get to the point where races are starting back up, but you're too fatigued mentally to, put in the work, like the meteor work of that marathon training. So for now, maybe it's just, doing what you can to stay sane, and being flexible with your training.
Or as a follow-up to that, what do you think about kind of going in to build anyways? Like this year, I basically had planned sort of a year out, like a spring cycle, a fall cycle, and then just basically being okay with the fact that may not get to race. Like I did on Monday last week, or this week, whatever. Like I did my own virtual marathon instead of running Boston. So just kind of doing the build anyways, because obviously being fit can't hurt. And then if it doesn't happen, at least you're fast, and you gotta do another cycle next year anyways. But I mean, it never ends. Does that sound terrible idea, or?
No, not at all. I think any gains that you make right now, you're still going to see in the future. So if you have that mental strength and you feel strong enough to go through that build, it's only going to benefit you. Some people, I think, maybe not having that race would make them not feel like the build is worthwhile. But if you're okay with not maybe being able to show it at the start line, knowing that it's still going to be there benefiting you, then that's great. And not a lot of, I think a lot of people want that actual race. So it's amazing if you can do that and be okay with it being a virtual race.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's a different story. Sounds good now at the beginning versus 12 weeks into it. And likewise, my virtual solo marathon was a great idea until 32K, and I was like, why am I doing this? But
as they are.
Exactly.
I'm
That's
impressed.
marathon story. So.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, you'll be stronger for it when you do eventually get to race.
Yeah, I don't know about time trials. Not really my thing. But
Yeah,
if you
that's what
can
I
do
heard
them,
you say.
if you can do them, all the power to you. Okay, so we have two more questions, then maybe I'll ask a finishing one. And then I meant to ask this one earlier. Do you have a favorite place to run or route for training runs?
Um, I like this 5K loop that we have pretty close to where I live, and it sort of goes, um, it's quite hilly. It's nice that it's 5K because if you're doing loops of that, that's sort of not too bad if it's during like your long run. And it's around the sort of UBC area, and then through what a lot of local runners call Little Australia. But that's probably my favorite loop because I've done almost every single marathon workout in the recent past on that loop, and that's worked well. Because I always think if I can run the pace on this hilly loop, then I will be good because none of the races I'm running are this hilly.
Fair enough. And as long as it's not a track, I gather you really like any loop.
Yes, that is true.
So, a question from Iveni, I think. Do you cut weight before a big race, or weight is stable throughout training? And then he asks, music or not during a long run?
The weight question is, I don't think I focus very much about weight, but going into a race, I might just sort of tighten up my nutrition for, 2 or 4 weeks going into a race. And I think that might lean me up a bit. It's such a touchy subject to talk
Yeah.
about weight and leanness, but I've been very different weights and had success at many different weights. It's also hard because I feel like I'm the type of person who carries a lot of muscle. So weight's a weird thing because sometimes you're stronger for it. But more so my focus is nutritionally, I'll probably tighten it up a bit going into a race, which sort of coincides a lot of times to the taper. So it just makes sense to me, and it's a way for me to just feel like I'm doing the most that I can going into an important race. And that's really just for those goal marathons. Otherwise, I'm more flexible with my diet.
And I appreciate you being kind of open with that question, because I know it is a touchy subject especially after the whole Salazar incident.
Oh,
So,
true, yeah.
Music or no music?
Usually no music. I've been known to listen to a podcast or two if I'm feeling like I have no motivation to get out the door. Workouts, I would never listen to anything, running wise, but sometimes I'll maybe music, maybe a podcast, usually nothing. Usually I'm fine with just my thoughts. I definitely listen to like music during like a bike workout, which I've been doing a lot of lately just to get in like a workout stimulus. And that's usually like quite angry music.
Fair enough. Okay, so last question, and this is a bit of like a blue sky forward thinking question. So Tokyo 2021 now, what is your, like, what would make that a success? Is just going a success? Is like embracing that experience a success? Or are you looking more like, are you going to be more number crunching? Like, oh, I'm ranked, say, 15th out of 80. I want to be at least that high in the rankings. So like, what's success in Tokyo? Or have you not thought of it yet?
No, I have thought of it, and it's hard because it's it's like I want to feel proud of how I raced, and maybe it shouldn't really be based on placing per se, because it's probably going to be a race of attrition, and I want to race smart. And I know that's hard to do, because when it's hot, it's about being patient, and I'm not known to be the most patient person. So I think if I looked back on my race, I just want to feel like I gave it my all, but that I also ran a tactically smart race. I'm hoping that that means that that's a top 20 result. I think that's possible. I just do not want another London. Because that was like, okay, I made it. That's great. I think I want to be proud of how I run there and how I represent my country. And it's not enough to just be there. Of course, like I want my performance to reflect what I can do.
Great. I think that's a great place to end off. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you everyone for joining. It was a great chat, and I hope everyone took something away. And I specifically like your positive kind of outlook towards everything. And that's something maybe we can all learn from, because we have the same experiences. Obviously, we go, oh, bad race, right? And it's important to see how you've kind of grown past those as well. And I think that's something that everyone can learn from.
Thanks. Yeah, I have learned so much, just to like have that outlook, and sort of learning through the struggles has, yeah, it's not just me, it's the people that I surround myself with help bring that out. So I have a great team.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dayna.
Thank you.
Good luck
Thanks,
in
Dayna.
Tokyo,
Thanks,
and we'll be watching.
Thank you so much. This was very fun. And thank you everyone for your questions. They were great.